They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when the people who share your blood act like you don't exist? I'm Callan Merritt, and for as long as I can remember, I was the shadow in my own family's story, forgotten, dismissed, erased. Standing at my father's funeral, surrounded by strangers who called themselves family, I realized everything I believed about where I belonged was a lie. What came next shattered the quiet life I thought I had and uncovered secrets that no one wanted me to find. If you're ready to hear how I fought to reclaim not just a fortune, but my identity, please like the video, subscribe to follow my journey, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This story isn't just about inheritance. It's about the cost of being forgotten and the power it takes to be remembered. As I walked into the chapel, a funeral staffer blocked me. "Family only, sir." Delora had clearly instructed him. On the memorial table, every photo showed Delora and her son, not a single one of me or Dad. I hadn't been back to the Merritt estate in 15 years. The iron gates, the gravel drive, the manicured lawn, all of it looked untouched by time, as if Dad's absence hadn't left a single dent. I parked at the far end, where the gardeners used to keep their trucks, away from the cluster of luxury sedans that lined the path like a showroom parade. The sky was that particular shade of winter gray that made the trees look like bones. I took a breath, gripped the steering wheel, and told myself to be calm. After all, I had every right to be here. I was Edwin Merritt's son, his only real son. But that didn't mean anyone inside would act like it. I stepped out of the car and buttoned my coat. The air smelled of damp earth and dying leaves. A breeze picked up, carrying with it faint strains of organ music and the muffled chatter of guests already gathered. I approached the side door of the chapel because I knew better than to try the main entrance. Delora had always made it clear. This was her world now, and I was not welcome in it. Still, I figured grief might soften her edges. I was wrong. A man in a tailored suit stepped in front of me before I could place my hand on the chapel door. His hair was too perfect, his expression too apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir," he said with a half step forward, placing his body between me and the entrance. "This area is reserved for family." "I am family," I said, not raising my voice. "Callan Merritt. Edwin was my father." He blinked, clearly surprised, then glanced down at a list on a clipboard as if confirming my existence. "I see. Yes, well, Mrs. Merritt left strict instructions about seating. You're to enter through the service corridor and use the side pews." He gestured toward a narrow path veering off behind a row of rose bushes. I didn't argue. What would be the point? Delora had staged this like a theater production, and she was not about to let the forgotten son ruin her spotlight. I followed the path in silence, my shoes crunching against pebbles as I passed the fountain my mother had commissioned when I was 10. It was dry now, the cherub cracked along one wing, the basin littered with dead leaves. Fitting, I thought. Inside, the chapel was dimly lit but warm, filled with the scent of lilies and polished wood. The pews were already filling. I slipped into the last row, unnoticed and unacknowledged. The white program handed to me at the door listed the service order, a short bio of my father, and tributes to be delivered by his beloved wife Delora and his cherished son Royce. My name was nowhere to be found, not even a footnote. I looked toward the front, where a massive portrait of Edwin Merritt rested on an easel surrounded by floral arrangements. He looked older in that photo, tired around the eyes, the weight of time settling into the corners of his mouth. But still, that was him, my father, the man who once carried me on his shoulders through this very chapel when I was a boy. The man who, for all his distance in later years, once tucked me into bed and whispered, "You're my greatest pride, Callan." But that memory felt brittle now, like a page torn from a book no one else believed was ever written. The organ music faded and a hush fell over the room. Delora walked up the aisle slowly, her posture regal, her black gown flowing like ink. Royce trailed behind her, his expression solemn but composed. He looked exactly like the photographs on the foyer table, polished, controlled, curated for legacy. Delora reached the podium and began her speech with the poised cadence of someone used to giving press statements. Edwin Merritt was a visionary, she said, her voice smooth and unwavering. A builder of empires, a devoted husband, and most importantly, a father who knew the meaning of loyalty. She paused for affect, letting the words settle. He loved his family, not just by blood, but by choice. And no one embodied his values more than Royce, his son, in every way that mattered. There it was. The rewrite. The erasure. A lump rose in my throat, but I swallowed it. I didn't move, didn't blink. I watched as Delora recited a love letter to her own design of our family. She spoke of vacations I was never invited to, holidays I'd spent alone in Zurich because Dad said it's complicated this year, and business milestones celebrated with champagne while I got a polite text saying, "Congrats on the nonprofit thing." The funeral was over, and with it, any fleeting illusion I might be acknowledged as Edwin Merritt's son. I lingered near the hydrangeas by the chapel entrance, letting the crowd thin, not because I wanted to avoid people, but because I wanted to see who would notice me. Spoiler, no one did. The only eye contact I received was from a valet, wondering if I'd parked in the wrong section. When I finally stepped into the main house, everything felt smaller than I remembered. The ceilings weren't lower, but my memories had made them cathedral high, and the chandelier in the entryway, once a glittering constellation, now just flickered weakly under the weight of its age. I walked past the foyer table, which had been turned into a curated memorial display. A giant canvas portrait of Dad and Royce dominated the center, flanked by framed magazine covers, photos of boardroom ribbon cuttings, a few candid snapshots of Delora and Edwin in vineyards, smiling over glasses of wine. What wasn't there? Any evidence I'd ever been born. No baby photo, no school picture, not even the family Christmas card from 1998 where I distinctly remembered being forced to wear a sweater 2 sizes too small. A woman I didn't recognize approached, wearing a black hat with a netted veil, and offered me a polite smile, the kind you give when you're trying to figure out why someone seems out of place. "Are you one of the staff?" she asked kindly, holding a glass of white wine as if it were her social shield. "I don't think we've met." "No," I said, mustering a smile. "I'm Callan, Edwin's son." Her eyebrows ticked up, not with recognition but with surprise. "I didn't realize," she trailed off, and in that unfinished sentence lived all the awkwardness in the world. She murmured a soft condolence and quickly turned back to her conversation group, where whispers buzzed like insects. "That's the son? I thought Royce was the only one." "No, he's from the first marriage, right? Didn't Edwin send him to Europe or something? I heard there was drama. Lawyers involved." I didn't flinch. I just found the bar. The bartender, a young guy with a tight haircut and a clipped accent, looked at me uncertainly. "Scotch." "Neat," I said before he could ask what I was doing there. As he poured, I caught sight of Royce standing at the center of a semicircle of guests near the conservatory, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled just enough to look relaxed but still executive. He was telling a story, some golf anecdote that made the group laugh too loud, too fast. Delora hovered beside him, sipping from a crystal flute, every now and then brushing invisible lint from his blazer or resting a possessive hand on his arm. He looked like he belonged, like he'd always belonged. I, on the other hand, was a shadow on the wall, a chapter from a draft the family had chosen not to publish. I moved toward the conservatory, not to confront, not yet, but just to remind them I existed. Royce saw me first. His smile didn't falter, but something behind his eyes shifted, something smug and satisfied. "Well," he said, raising his glass slightly, "look who the cat dragged in." The group chuckled, unsure whether it was a joke or a jab. "Didn't expect to see you here, Cal." "Europe keeping you busy?" "Only as busy as being omitted from funeral programs," I replied evenly, keeping my voice low but firm. A couple of the older men in the group chuckled uncomfortably. One woman excused herself. Royce tilted his head. "Come on, man. Don't be like that. It's been years. We barely know each other anymore." "Whose fault is that?" I asked. His smile cracked, Just a hairline fracture before he turned it into a shrug. You made your choices. Dad made his. We all move on. Dolores stepped in then, her presence as crisp as her tailored dress. Callan, she said with mock warmth, perhaps now isn't the time to stir things up. This is a day to honor Edwin, not air old grievances. Is that what we're doing? I asked, gesturing to the photo shrine. Because from what I see, you're honoring a version of him that never included me. Her lips pressed together. I won't do this here. Of course not, I said. You never did it anywhere. Royce stepped closer, lowering his voice. Look, if you're here to make a scene, I'm here because he was my father, I snapped, and because I deserve to be. Dolores' eyes darted to the remaining guests, her public mask wobbling just slightly. Then act like it. Show some dignity. You mean like the dignity it took to erase me from the will reading announcement? With a part where I had to find out from a third party what time the service started? Royce looked at Delora, suddenly unsure. She shook her head gently, as if calming a skittish horse. Let's not turn this into theater. But it already was theater. I was the forgotten character making an unscripted return, and everyone was waiting to see if I'd flip the table. Edwin's portrait had been moved to the center, the lighting above it adjusted just so, the shadows perfectly trimmed to make him look like a statesman. And there, beside him, newly installed and equally glorified, was Royce, jaw clenched, tie sharp, his eyes edited to project leadership. The family wall had been rewritten, one generation gone, another manufactured. My photo was nowhere in sight. Not from my graduation, not from my brief stint at Wharton before I transferred overseas. Not even the childhood portrait where I sat in Edwin's lap, the one that used to hang in his study before Delora had redecorated the house into a museum of her making. I turned and entered the guest bedroom that used to be mine before I was relocated to a European boarding school with no return date. The room was now a sitting area, done up in muted taupe and bronze. The bed was gone, replaced by a sleek leather couch and coffee table stacked with travel magazines. Even here, there was no trace of me. It wasn't just neglect, it was precision. Everything about the house had been pruned, rewritten. Even the wallpaper had changed. I headed back downstairs, my jaw tight, my thoughts sharper than the ice in my glass. In the main lounge, Dolores stood at the piano, chatting with someone from the foundation board. I passed her without stopping. Royce had moved to the study, and so did I. That room, once my father's sanctum, had been transformed into a showroom office, more Dolores' taste than Dad's. Gone were the dark woods and antique shelves. In their place were glass panels, steel fixtures, and LED art pieces that screamed Silicon Valley instead of old money. Royce was holding court near the fireplace with two men in dark suits. They laughed when he said something, then turned as I entered. Callan, he said, as if tasting the name for the first time. Nice of you to rejoin the party. Thought you'd vanished again. Just taking a walk through my childhood, I said. What's left of it? He didn't blink, just offered me a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Look, I get it. This is weird. We're not close enemies either. Aren't we? I replied. Because the way I see it, your family's done everything possible to make me disappear. One of the suited men gave Royce a glance, excused himself, and walked off. The other lingered a moment before following. I stepped closer. Where's the will? I asked. Not the public statement Delora handed to the press. The real one. There is no other will, Royce said, his voice quiet but defensive. Dad updated it last year. Everything is exactly as he wanted it. Interesting, I replied. Considering I spoke to his assistant in London 2 months ago, she said he drafted new terms, confidential ones. That caught his attention. He didn't speak, but I saw his throat move as he swallowed. You're bluffing, he said. Then why are you sweating? I asked, leaning in. All I want is transparency. A name. A line in print that says I was his son. You're not entitled to anything just because of DNA, he snapped, louder than he meant to. Heads turned. Delora appeared in the doorway, brows raised, wine glass perfectly balanced. Is everything all right? She asked, already knowing it wasn't. Just a bit of family reminiscing, I said. Royce was reminding me that biology doesn't count unless you're in the brochure. Callan, she began, stepping closer, her voice smooth like lacquer. You have to understand, Edwin was building something toward the end. Stability. A clean transition. He didn't want more conflict. He just wanted a clean legacy, I said. One that didn't include mistakes. You're not a mistake, she said too quickly. Then what am I? I asked. Because I see the boards you're sitting on now. I see the social profiles, the press releases. You talk about Merritt Holdings like it's a two-person invention. Him and Royce. I'm not even a footnote. She straightened her back, voice growing icier. We've done what's best for the company, for the family's public standing. Edwin's vision was to simplify, to protect the brand, by cutting off his own blood, by recognizing loyalty, she replied. You left, Callan. You distanced yourself. You didn't want to be involved. I left because I was pushed, I said, anger slipping through the cracks. You made this place so suffocating I couldn't breathe in it. You turned my father into an absentee, and when he did reach out, it was always filtered through your tone, your needs, your agenda. Roy stepped between us then, physically separating the space. This isn't the time, he said. And if you care about Dad, you'd respect that. Don't tell me how to mourn, I snapped. Don't pretend like you get to define how much he meant to me. You're making a scene, Delora said. You've always had a flair for drama. No, I said, calming myself with a breath. Drama is lying to an entire room full of people about who Edwin Merritt really was. Drama is scrubbing me from every picture, every document, every ounce of memory this house could carry, and pretending you're doing it for love. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Delora laughed, a small, controlled sound. You're right, she said. We've controlled the narrative, because someone had to. Edwin didn't have the strength anymore. He didn't want you complicating things. But he didn't erase me, I said, pulling an envelope from my inner coat pocket. He mailed this 3 weeks before he died. Certified. Handwritten. And unlike your version of his legacy, this one has a signature. Her expression flickered. Just a blink of alarm. Then it was gone. Anyone can forge a letter. Sure, I said. I headed back toward the east wing, my feet drawn by instinct more than intention. That side of the house had once been my father's private world. Before Delora, before Royce, before the renovations turned the place into a cold shell of its former self, it was a space of leather chairs, heavy curtains, antique shelves, and quiet. A place where Edwin Merritt retreated not to rule, but to think. I wanted to see what had been done to it. I needed to know what had been removed. The door was locked. Not unexpected, but it still annoyed me. I checked the drawer of the adjacent hall table. Empty. No spare keys, no envelopes, nothing. Just polished mahogany and silence. I leaned against the wall, pressing my palm flat against it, remembering the warmth of afternoons spent curled in the corner of that room, reading reports I barely understood just to feel close to the man who never had enough time. And now, even in death, he was being kept from me. I turned around and headed back toward the rear staircase, detouring past the small library. The room was dim, only one lamp on in the far corner, casting golden light over a few scattered books. Here, at least, traces of my father still remained. I recognized some of the titles: biographies of political leaders, naval strategy manuals, obscure historical essays. Books Edwin had loved not for what they said, but for what they revealed between the lines. I ran my hand along the shelf, stopping at the spot where my mother's favorite poetry collection used to sit. It was gone now, of course. I found no framed photos of her either, no marks of her laughter, no memory of her voice. The erasure wasn't passive. It was intentional, surgical. Delora hadn't just reshaped the narrative, she'd gutted the archives. I walked around the back shelves, checking for anything left untouched. Then I noticed it, a faint outline in the dust where a frame used to be, the size and shape unmistakable. The portrait of me and Dad from the summer after I turned 10. The fishing trip. The photo he kept in every office he'd ever worked in. Gone. I stood there, staring at the absence, feeling the way the air seemed colder without it. A small voice behind me broke the moment. "You used to sit in that window seat and read for hours." I turned. It was Yvette, the housekeeper who had been with us since before Royce ever arrived. She looked older now, her hair streaked with silver, but her eyes still carried the same warmth I remembered. "I didn't think they'd let you come," she said. "They didn't. I came anyway." She nodded slowly, walking toward the shelf. "Delora made me box everything up after your father passed. Said it was time to move forward." "Did she tell you where it went?" I asked. "Photos? The letters?" "Storage. Somewhere out of state. But not everything left this house." She reached into the drawer of a small side table and pulled out a faded envelope. My name was scrawled on the front in my father's distinct handwriting. "I wasn't supposed to keep it," Yvette said, voice low. "But I couldn't throw it away." I took it with shaking hands, the edges soft from age, but the seal still intact. "Thank you," I said, barely above a whisper. She just patted my shoulder and walked out. I sat on the window bench and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, folded once. The ink was slightly smudged, but the words were clear. "Callan, if you're reading this, it means you've come back. I don't know if you'll find what you're looking for. I don't even know if I have the right to ask for your forgiveness. But I want you to know this house was never a home without you in it. I let someone convince me you were a liability to protect. I should have fought harder. I should have called more. I should have done better. Love, Dad." I read it twice, then a third time. Then I folded it and placed it in my inside pocket, next to the other envelope. Now I had two pieces of evidence the world hadn't seen. Two truths Delora hadn't scrubbed clean. I stood and walked back toward the main hall. A new sense of calm steadied my hands. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I had a mission. I passed through the dining room, where the post-funeral reception was in full swing. People chatted with soft laughter and delicate sorrow, as if mourning was something that needed to be polite. Delora held court at the center, laughing too brightly, her glass always full. I paused near the entryway, letting the shadows hide me. "He left me everything," she said to a woman in pearls. He knew Royce was the only one who shared his vision. "What about the other one?" the woman asked. "The son from the first wife?" Delora sipped her drink, shrugged, and smiled. "Oh, that boy." Edwin barely remembered him. He was always more of a charity case than a child. Poor thing showed up today like he expected something. But Edwin knew better. He knew blood isn't enough. I stepped forward. She saw me then. The following morning, I returned to the estate under the guise of collecting a few personal belongings, an excuse that Royce's assistant approved without question. He didn't see me as a threat. He thought I was sentimental, still mourning, still lost in the shadows of a man I'd barely known. But grief wasn't what brought me back. It was the itch that had started the moment I saw Royce standing by that fireplace, casually dismissing my father's real final wishes like they were a smear on the glass of his carefully polished life. That itch became certainty when I read the Zurich letter again that morning. In it, Edwin wrote that he had executed a separate revision to his will, one that redistributed the Merritt estate's shares and assets more evenly and designated me as co-chair of the Merritt Foundation, a position Delora had since claimed for herself. The letter referred specifically to documents entrusted to Mr. Kessler, Edwin's personal attorney abroad, with instructions to deliver them in person should anything happen. Yet no mention of that will had surfaced. No legal reading. No copies. Nothing. And if Delora had her way, it would stay that way. So I needed to find out what else they were hiding. The moment I walked into my father's old home office again, now repurposed as Royce's command center, I noticed the subtle signs of manipulation. The credenza that once held rows of my father's journals was now filled with corporate awards and press clippings about Royce's strategic leadership. The antique globe was gone, replaced by a sleek, glass-encased blueprint of a future development Royce was spearheading. He had repainted the room, even swapped the desk chair. The man was allergic to legacy unless it bore his initials. But what he hadn't changed was the floorboard beneath the eastern bookcase, the one that creaked slightly when you stepped on it. A detail I remembered from when I was 13 and hiding comic books behind the volumes of Churchill memoirs. I waited until the house fell quiet. Royce and Delora both away at a press luncheon for the new Merit Mentorship Initiative, their names etched into programs that didn't mention Edwin or me. I used that time to pry up the board with a letter opener, heart hammering as I revealed the narrow crawl space beneath. I reached in and felt the edge of something hard. A lockbox. Dusty, dented, but still sealed. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small briefcase, and it took me 15 long minutes of quietly testing combinations before I landed on the right one, my father's military ID number. Something he recited once while showing me his medals during a rare moment of softness. The lock clicked. Inside were folders bound in leather bands, a small drive labeled Merritt Kessler Final, and a single envelope marked, if contested, deliver to court. I closed the box and slid it under my coat, my chest buzzing with disbelief. This wasn't just a backup plan. It was a time bomb Edwin had left in case the people around him betrayed their word. I returned to my hotel room in town, locked the door, and opened the folders. Inside were signed documents, dated, witnessed, and notarized, outlining the revised structure of the estate. Edwin had redirected 30% of Merit holdings to me, 10% to various charities he'd supported anonymously, and reduced Delora's control to a single administrative role, which she would forfeit if found to have interfered in any legal procedure after his death. Royce's stake was conditional upon ethical conduct and ongoing audits. Edwin had covered every angle. He had seen the storm coming. He just hadn't told anyone he'd built a shelter. I scrolled through the digital drive next, eyes scanning scans of his handwritten notes, letters he never sent, journal entries chronicling his doubts about Delora's intentions, and one audio file. I clicked play. If you're hearing this, Callan, then something's gone wrong. I didn't expect to die suddenly, but I've learned that life doesn't wait for us to fix our mistakes. I tried to make it right. I couldn't undo the past, but I could at least acknowledge it. You were never the problem. I was. I let people isolate me, wear me down, convince me you didn't need me. That was a lie, and so is the idea that this empire should pass on without you. Do what you must, son, but don't let them erase you. Not again. The silence that followed that final sentence lasted longer than the recording. I sat back in the chair, letting the sound of my own breath remind me I was still here, still real. And now I had the arsenal. What came next wasn't about revenge. It was about correction. The next morning, I arranged a meeting with my lawyer, a man named Bryce Hammond who specialized in family estate battles and whose firm had taken down dynasties built on false paper trails. When he saw the documents, his expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment. "This isn't a rumor," he said. "This is bulletproof." "So what's next?" I asked. "We prepare," he said. "We don't just walk into a legal hearing. We walk in with the lights turned on, the press notified, and the opposition exposed. You've got truth, but they've got spin." But this time, I wasn't going to be buried. While they attended luncheons and accepted meaningless plaques with their names engraved in gold, I worked with Bryce and his legal team to build an airtight case. We scanned every page, double-checked each notarization, compiled timelines, prepared a release for the press that would go live the moment the court filing became public record. It was surgical, calculated. But I knew something else was needed. A nudge. A small, precise act that would make Delora sweat, make Royce second-guess his untouchable status, make the house of cards tremble before I even touched it. So on the morning of the third day, I returned to the estate. Not unannounced. I emailed Royce's assistant 2 hours before, asking for a brief meeting about a personal matter of closure. That phrasing was deliberate. It made me sound vulnerable. Small, manageable, the way they preferred me. When I arrived, the estate manager greeted me with confusion masked by professionalism. Mr. Royce is in his office. Mrs. Merritt is in the solarium with guests. I'll wait, I said. Let him know I'm in the West Gallery. The West Gallery was the oldest wing of the estate, filled with artifacts my father collected over his lifetime. Paintings, sculptures, war medals from ancestors long gone. It was the only space that Laura hadn't managed to completely sterilize. And in its silence, I found the echo of a name that still mattered. Mine. I stood near a painting I remembered as a child, an oil portrait of a ship caught in a storm, waves crashing over the deck, the mast split, but still upright. I had always thought it looked like survival. Royce found me there 20 minutes later, dressed casually but still strategic, sleeves rolled, no tie, a hint of cologne strong enough to imply control. Closure, huh? He said, leaning against the gallery railing. Didn't take you for the poetic type. Just wanted to talk, I said. Man to man. No lawyers. No crowd. You've had your say, he replied. You came. You mourned. Everyone's ready to move on. Except me, I said, turning toward him. Because something's been bothering me. Dad always told me he wanted to pass the foundation to someone who understood people, not just profits. That doesn't exactly scream you. Royce chuckled, but his posture stiffened. He changed his mind. People evolve. You would have known that if you'd stuck around. And yet, I said slowly, he kept meeting with attorneys outside of your network. He kept letters in safes. He recorded audio messages, almost like he was preparing for someone to rewrite his legacy without him. Royce's smile cracked. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm stating facts. And I'm giving you a chance to come clean before this goes public. He stepped forward. Is that a threat? It's a courtesy, I said. One Dad would have offered. One you and Delora never did. His eyes darted, calculating. You've got nothing. If you did, we'd be in court already. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'm letting you choose the terms. Maybe I'm offering you one last chance to be a man instead of a puppet. He didn't answer. I watched the war behind his eyes, pride clashing with panic. Then he turned and walked out without another word. That was enough. The mask had cracked. I left the gallery and made my way down the hall, pausing near the solarium where Delora's laughter rang too sharp to be sincere. She was holding court as always, flanked by socialites and foundation donors. Sipping champagne like power was something that could be swallowed. I waited just long enough for her to see me. Our eyes locked. I smiled. She didn't. No return address, but I knew the handwriting on the envelope. It was Delora's. Inside was a single sheet of thick ivory paper. Stop this now, and we can discuss a reasonable settlement. No drama. No court. Walk away, and you'll be taken care of. No signature, just entitlement dressed as diplomacy. I laughed out loud. She thought I was still that teenager who left without a fight. She thought I still had a price. The next morning, I made my move. Bryce filed the paperwork at the county courthouse at 9:01 a.m. By 9:45, press outlets started calling. By 10:30, Delora's assistant left me 5 voicemails in a row. I didn't answer. I was on my way back to the estate. This time, I wasn't there to talk. I arrived just as the board members of Merritt Holdings were gathering for a quarterly brunch. I walked in through the front entrance, the one they blocked me from during the funeral, and handed the receptionist a sealed packet. For the board, I said. They'll want to read it before the meeting starts. Then I walked out. I didn't need to stay and watch the detonation. The documents spoke for themselves. Certified copies of the Zurich will, signed affidavits, Edwin's handwritten letters, and most damning of all, the audio recording. Bryce had transcribed it and included a QR code that linked to the secure file. My father's voice, clear and deliberate, spelling out his true wishes. The news broke online before noon. By early afternoon, headlines were already trending. I'd been a ghost at a funeral, a name spoken in hushed tones, or not at all. Now I was plastered across headlines, interviews, and trending threads. But none of that mattered as much as what was happening behind the closed doors of the Merritt estate. According to Bryce, Delora's legal team had already reached out in a panic, requesting delays, private meetings, anything to keep the court filing from progressing to a full probate hearing. That meant only one thing. They knew they'd been caught. They knew the documents I held weren't just symbolic gestures of a forgotten son. They were legally binding, strategically timed, and deadly precise. But what they didn't know, not yet anyway, was that I had one more card to play. Because in addition to the will, the letters, the audio, and the affidavits, Edwin had left me something else. It arrived late. A courier dropped it off at my hotel after the first wave of news broke, handed to me in a slim black envelope sealed with wax. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten note from my father that said, "If it all goes wrong, open the vault. Everything they buried is still inside." I didn't need further explanation. I knew exactly what he meant. The Merritt estate had a vault. Not metaphorically, not a study with file cabinets, but an actual steel, reinforced vault hidden behind a false wall in what used to be the private wine cellar. Edwin used it to store rare documents, war memorabilia, investment bonds, and files that were too sensitive for the cloud or a safety deposit box. I remembered it from when I was 16, back when he still trusted me enough to show me things. But Delora had always wanted that vault sealed. When she remodeled the lower wing of the house, she had the entrance concealed behind wine racks, saying it no longer fit the aesthetic. But it wasn't about style. It was about control. I knew if I could get inside, I'd find more than legal documents. I'd find the truth, the version that hadn't been edited by Delora's handlers or Royce's PR team. So I returned to the estate one final time, not through the front, not as a guest or a threat, but as a son reclaiming what had been hidden. I brought two people with me, Bryce and a locksmith from the city who specialized in legacy vault access. The house staff hesitated at first, but when I showed them the court order granting me temporary access to my father's personal effects, they relented. Royce and Delora were in Manhattan for emergency board meetings, trying to contain the storm. They had no idea I was about to crack open the dam. The basement was cold, lit by recessed lights and echoing with the soft hum of refrigeration units from the wine cellar's climate control system. I guided the locksmith to the far wall, directed him to the hidden panel behind the rack of Bordeaux bottles, and watched as he ran his hands across the wood until he found the faint seam. "This is it," I said. "Can you get it open?" "It's old, but not unbreakable," he replied. "Give me 20 minutes. It took 15. The panel slid away with a soft hiss, revealing a matte steel door with a 4-digit keypad. I typed in the code my father once whispered to me while showing me his grandfather's war medals, 1918. The year World War I ended. The lock clicked. The door opened. Inside was a narrow room lined with shelves, folders, and boxes, everything meticulously labeled. Edwin had organized his life like a military archive, chronological, indexed, and complete. We began scanning through the documents. Bryce's eyes widened as he read the contents. There were letters between Edwin and government officials, foundation tax documents showing misappropriated funds funneled quietly to Delora's personal ventures without board approval. There were emails printed and annotated, showing Royce manipulating internal votes to position himself as the sole successor to the Merritt executive chair. There were handwritten notes detailing Edwin's mounting suspicions, his growing isolation, and finally, his decision to act quietly, legally, and permanently. And then we found it. A full video recording, time-stamped, notarized, of Edwin reading his final wishes aloud, holding the signed document and speaking directly to camera. "This is my voice. This is my decision. Expect it to be honored. If anyone contests it, they are contesting me, not my son." He paused, then looked down. "To Callan, if you're watching this, I failed in 100 ways. But this one thing I can still get right. Don't let them erase you. Don't let them rewrite your blood. I built this empire for legacy, and legacy means truth. I stood in that vault and let the silence of my father's final truth wrap around me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt seen. I felt named. We copied everything. Backups were uploaded to Bryce's secured cloud. Physical documents were cataloged. By the time Delora and Royce returned to the estate that night, the narrative they had spent years curating was already collapsing under the weight of real evidence. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to threaten. All I had to do was show them the truth and watch them realize the battle wasn't coming. It was already over. The next morning, we released the video. National networks picked it up within the hour. I watched the board meeting live stream from my lawyer's office as shareholders and executives demanded transparency, questioning the legitimacy of Royce's claims and Delora's management. I wasn't just the forgotten son anymore. I was the voice of truth, the bearer of the evidence that shattered their carefully constructed facade. Royce, who had once smiled with smug certainty, now appeared defensive and visibly shaken during the meeting. His usual composed demeanor faltered as one by one, board members called for an immediate audit and demanded the results of the legal proceedings. Delora, ever the tactician, released a statement denying the authenticity of the documents, but her words fell flat, drowned by the weight of Edwin's own voice playing on every news channel and social platform. I could almost hear the panic behind closed doors as Delora convened with her legal team, their expressions tight with worry. I was watching history rewrite itself, and the narrative was finally mine to tell. But the fight wasn't over. Legal battles are marathons, not sprints. My lawyer and I prepared for the courtroom, knowing that every document, every testimony, every bit of proof had to be airtight. We lined up witnesses, former employees who had witnessed the financial discrepancies, accountants who could trace the money diverted by Delora, and old friends of Edwin who confirmed his doubts about the estate's current management. The public's support was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from strangers and acquaintances alike, many thanking me for standing up to the injustice and finally unveiling the truth. It was a long overdue reckoning. When the first hearing was scheduled, the courthouse was swarmed with reporters and onlookers. Cameras flashed as I entered, not as a forgotten son, but as the rightful heir fighting to restore his legacy. Inside the courtroom, the air was tense. Delora sat at the defense table, her expression cold, her eyes flitting to Royce, who looked equally exhausted and cornered. The judge was firm but fair, and from the outset, it was clear that the evidence was stacked in my favor. Witness after witness corroborated my claims. The financial records were undeniable. Edwin's video testament was played multiple times. I sat quietly through much of the trial, knowing my presence was as powerful as any argument. When it was my turn to speak, I told the story not just of betrayal, but of a son's love and the right to be remembered honestly. I spoke of my father's regrets, his hopes, and the legacy he had entrusted to me, not just in money, but in honor. Outside the courthouse, the public's reaction was electric. News anchors debated, social media buzzed with support, and for the first time, Delora's carefully maintained image began to crumble in the court of public opinion. Weeks later, the verdict came. The judge ruled in my favor, recognizing the Zurich will as the legally binding final testament of Edwin Merritt. The estate was to be redistributed accordingly, and Delora and Royce were ordered to relinquish control of Merritt Holdings and the family foundation. The ruling was a seismic victory, but I knew the true battle was reclaiming what had been lost. Not just assets, but a name, a history, a place in the world. Returning to the estate after the ruling, I walked through halls I had once feared, now feeling a quiet sense of ownership. The paintings, the furniture, the very walls whispered stories I was finally free to retell. Her spokespeople scrambled to contain the narrative, but the truth had taken on a life of its own, one that no amount of spin could control. Royce, stripped of his position and influence, faced not only public disgrace but a growing number of legal inquiries into his financial conduct. Regulators began investigating the discrepancies exposed by the documents I had uncovered in the vault, revealing patterns of embezzlement and fraudulent transactions. The media framed him as the archetype of a privileged heir undone by greed and deceit, a narrative reinforced by the testimonies of former associates and whistleblowers who came forward once the dam had broken. Within the Merritt family, the consequences were equally severe. Relatives who had previously aligned themselves with Delora and Royce began distancing themselves, fearful of being tainted by association. Invitations to social events ceased. Phone calls went unanswered. Loneliness crept in like a shadow, swallowing the spaces once occupied by false loyalty and pretense. I, on the other hand, found a strange sense of peace in the chaos. Every challenge, every slight, every quiet dismissal over the years had led to this moment, the unveiling of a truth too potent to ignore. It wasn't simply about money or property. It was about justice, about reclaiming my identity and my father's legacy. The estate itself became a battleground, not just of legal ownership, but of memory and meaning. As I walked through the halls that had once felt foreign, I found remnants of a past Delora had tried to erase. Handwritten notes tucked into drawers, photographs hidden behind books, old recordings tucked away in drawers. Each discovery was a small victory, a restoration of the narrative she had so ruthlessly rewritten. One afternoon, while exploring the library, I found a letter tucked inside a book of poetry Dad had once gifted me. It was from Delora, addressed to Edwin, dated months before their marriage. The letter was polite on the surface, but laced with ambition and thinly veiled threats about control and inheritance. It was a reminder that the battle for power had begun long before Dad's death. This knowledge steeled my resolve. I was no longer a victim, but a survivor, someone who had navigated the shadows to emerge into the light. As the estate's new steward, I faced the daunting task of rebuilding trust, not just within the family, but with the broader community Dad had cared about. I reached out to charities, community leaders, and longtime employees, seeking to restore the philanthropic spirit that had been smothered under Delora's reign. Slowly, the foundation began to regain its footing, its mission realigned with the values Edwin had championed. Throughout this process, the ghosts of the past lingered. I often found myself standing by the lake where Dad and I had spent summers, the quiet water reflecting a sky wide and open. It was there I understood that legacy isn't just about wealth or titles, but about the impact we leave on those who come after us. The price Delora and Royce paid was steep, not just financial, but the loss of family, reputation, and the fragile trust that binds people together. The morning light spilled gently through the tall windows of the Merritt Estate's great hall as I stood alone, absorbing the weight of everything that had passed and everything yet to come. The echoes of the courtroom had faded, but their reverberations lingered inside me, urging me forward. I wasn't just reclaiming a name or property. I was stepping into the role my father had hoped for me, tasked not merely with stewardship of his wealth, but with honoring his vision and his soul. Walking through the halls, I felt the transformation beneath my feet. The house no longer whispered stories of exclusion or erasure, but held the promise of renewal. I ran my fingers along the spines of restored books on the shelves and traced my hand over the polished mahogany of desks once abandoned. Every corner held memory and possibility intertwined. I spent hours meeting with the estate staff, reassuring those loyal to the Merritt legacy that their service was not forgotten. The old housekeeper, Yvette, who had been my secret ally through the darkest days, smiled as I thanked her for safeguarding the letters and photographs she refused to surrender. Together, we began to catalog the archives, piecing together a history nearly lost. But restoration was not merely about material reclamation. It was about healing the wounds left by years of denial and deceit. I reached out to family members who had kept their distance, offering openness where there had been walls. Some responded with cautious hope, others with lingering pain, but all were touched by the sincerity of my efforts. I also renewed the Foundation's mission, dedicating it to causes my father had cared about deeply: education, veteran support, and community development. For the first time, we held an annual event honoring the real legacy of Edwin Merritt, celebrating truth, resilience, and unity. I understood that my inheritance was more than the bricks and money. It was the responsibility to carry forward a light that had flickered but never died. It was about legacy in its purest form, the impact we leave on others, the stories passed down through generations, and the courage to stand for what is right. One afternoon, as the sun began to set over the estate's sprawling grounds, I found myself at the lake where my father and I had spent those fleeting summers. The water was calm, reflecting the fiery hues of dusk, the world bathed in gold and shadow. I sat on the weathered dock, holding a framed photo of us fishing, the one Delora had tried to hide, now proudly displayed in the library. I whispered a quiet promise to the wind. I won't let your memory fade. I'll carry it forward with honesty and love. That promise was both an ending and a beginning. The battle had been long and painful, but it led to truth restored and justice served. I was no longer the erased son, but the rightful heir and guardian of a legacy far greater than wealth or titles. The house was alive again, filled with the laughter of friends and family, the warmth of shared memories, and the hum of purpose. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. I'd love to hear what you think about the plot. Did the twist surprise you? Was there a part that really hit home? Also, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to connect with people from all over. Your support means the world to me and helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching.